So, in 2026, the United States is about to hit a huge milestone, 250 years. Now, there are going to be plenty of celebrations for sure, but this anniversary is also a really unique chance to look at the American journey. You know, how it all started, the incredible struggles it faced, and what that original spirit really means for the challenges we're all facing right now.
I mean, think about that. 250 years. It's a pretty significant number. So how does a nation, one founded on a pretty radical idea, make it for 2.5 centuries? The story is so much bigger than just a single date. It's really about the harsh realities that led up to July 4th, 1776, and the ideals that have been tested constantly from that day forward.
And that word "began" is so important here. It tells us that independence wasn't the finish line, it was the starting pistol for this continuous journey. And this particular journey, well, it kicked off with a massive conflict, a rebellion that was sparked by a crisis that threw everyday people into some truly extraordinary situations. So where did this all start? Well, it wasn't some lofty philosophical debate. It was actually about something much more down to earth, money, or more specifically, who was going to pay for a very expensive war.
Here's the deal. Britain won the French and Indian War, and they gained a massive amount of territory in North America. But that victory came at a huge cost. The empire was basically broke. And when Parliament looked across the Atlantic, they saw 13 colonies that, in their view, had benefited from British protection and should, help foot the bill.
And things escalated fast. We're talking about just over a decade, where the colonists went from being proud British subjects to full-blown rebels. It all started with tax disputes, like the Stamp Act. Then it blew up with protests, like the Boston Tea Party. And it all came to a head with a series of really harsh laws that the colonists saw as a direct attack on their rights.
See, at the heart of all this, it wasn't just about the money. It was a clash over a really fundamental idea. The colonists were used to being taxed by their own elected officials. So getting taxed by a parliament thousands of miles away, where they had zero representation, felt like a total violation of their rights. But from Parliament's point of view, it was simple. The colonies needed to chip in for their own defense.
Okay, so after the Boston Tea Party, Britain decided enough was enough. They were going to make an example out of Massachusetts, and their response wasn't just another tax. It was a set of laws so brutal, the colonists called them the Intolerable Acts. These weren't about raising money. Oh no, these were a direct assault on their property, their trade, their right to govern themselves, and even their justice system. Shutting down Boston Harbor, that was an economic death sentence. Tearing up their charter, that was like erasing their whole political identity.
And by 1775, the whole conversation had shifted. Those intolerable acts had actually united the colonies like nothing before. The debate was no longer about boycotts or writing petitions. As Patrick Henry made crystal clear, it was now about liberty or death. It was about war.
Now, you have to remember, they were up against the most powerful military on the planet. The Continental Army couldn't win a straight-up fight. So, their victory was going to depend on two very different but totally essential pillars. One was strategic ingenuity, and the other was just sheer gritty endurance.
Let's talk about that first pillar, ingenuity. And there's no better example than the Battle of Saratoga. This was not your classic European-style battle with armies lining up at a field. The Americans used the terrain, they used guerrilla tactics, stuff that just completely baffled the highly trained but very rigid British forces. It led to an absolutely stunning American victory. Saratoga wasn't just another win. I mean, this was a game changer. It was a huge military victory, obviously, and a massive morale boost. But the really big deal, it proved to the rest of the world, especially France, that this American rebellion was for real. And that led to the French alliance, which brought in the money, the soldiers, and the ships that they desperately needed to actually win the war. But right on the heels of this incredible, brilliant victory, the Continental Army walked straight into its darkest hour. During that miserable winter of 1777-78 at Valley Forge, the enemy wasn't the British Army. The enemy was disease, it was starvation, and the bitter, freezing cold. And the human cost, it was just staggering. We're talking about 2,000 soldiers, a huge chunk of Washington's army, who died at Valley Forge, and not from a single bullet being fired, but from sickness and exposure. This wasn't about strategy anymore. This was purely about survival, about sheer human will and their absolute commitment to the cause. And what held them together through all of that? Leadership.
This quote from George Washington at Valley Forge is just so powerful. He's not just barking orders from somewhere warm. He's right there with them, sharing their pain and promising them that their endurance, their suffering, is going to lead to victory. He's promising them that perseverance will pay off. It was that exact mix, the cleverness of Saratoga and the grit of Valley Forge, that really defined the entire revolution.
Okay, so that brings us all the way back to today. The revolution was won, the nation was founded. But that core spirit of taking on impossible challenges, of mixing ingenuity with endurance, that is still a huge part of the American story.
So the big question for us, as we're getting close to this 250th anniversary, is where do we see that spirit now? What's our generation's Saratoga? What's our Valley Forge? What is our next great frontier?
Well, one really powerful answer, believe it or not, is written in the stars. Set to launch right around the 250th anniversary, NASA's Artemis II mission is going to send humans back to lunar orbit. It's a pretty fitting tribute, right? It's a modern version of that same drive to explore, to innovate, and to do things that seem downright impossible.
And what's really interesting is how that idea of ingenuity has changed. Remember how the French alliance was so critical back then? Well, the Artemis program is built on a similar idea, but for our time. It is intentionally designed to be a team effort, a collaboration with other countries and private companies to push the boundaries of what we can do. It's a whole new strategy for a whole new frontier.
So as we're counting down to 2026, it's pretty clear this anniversary isn't just about patting ourselves on the back for the past. It's really about looking forward and understanding that the American journey was never easy, and it's certainly not finished. I think this next quote just nails it. It says, "The journey is a perpetual exercise in problem solving." And that's exactly right. This country isn't some finished product on a shelf. It's a work in progress. It's a constant process of facing down problems and figuring out how to solve them, whether that's winning a war or dealing with the incredible complexities of modern spaceflight. So, when it comes right down to it, the true measure of success in 2026 isn't going to be how big the parties are or how great the fireworks look. It's going to be our ability to tackle the big, messy problems of our time, from the technical glitches in our space programs to the deep challenges in our own democracy. That same spirit is required. And that leaves us with one final and pretty big question. For 2.5 centuries, ingenuity and endurance have been the engine of the American story. But as we look ahead to the next 250 years and all the unknown challenges that are waiting for us, you have to ask, will those two things still be enough? The anniversary isn't just a celebration. It's really a challenge to all of us to answer that very question.
This is the brief on USA Infinity. They make it really clear that if a video blew your mind or maybe just hit close to home, you shouldn't just scroll past. That feeling, that's your cue to hit subscribe and officially join the community. It's about making sure they can keep uncovering these incredible stories all across the states. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.